Welcome into 49ers Access. My name is Sterling Bennett, and today we are going to react to the San Francisco 49er 53-man roster announcement. Who did they keep? Who did they cut? And the surprises along the way. Have a handful of other roster moves that were made, including Talanoa Hufanga, Elijah Mitchell, and Dre Greenlaw. But in this video, we are going to dive into every single position, quarterback, running back, all the way down the list, and talk about each cut, each player that was kept, and dive into your San Francisco 49ers 2024 roster. I do want to say this, that although the roster is at 53 men and it's quote unquote finalized, I would expect moves to happen tomorrow as well. Primarily John Feliciano and Ambry Thomas being placed on injured reserve. But also, cut down day is a tough day for a lot of people. I know it's exciting for Niner fans and fans across the NFL because you're gearing up towards the NFL regular season. I know I'm ready for Niners Jets, Levi Stadium, week 1 primetime football, Rodgers back in the Bay, and hopefully gearing up for another Super Bowl potential run. But again, there are some negatives to a day like this. A lot of players were cut. I think it was a total of 37, if my math is correct, by the Niners account. Then you multiply that by 32 other teams. So a lot of people do not have jobs currently. They got fired in a sense. Many of them may be brought back via the practice squad. But although a great day for fans to try to see who's making the roster and kind of figure out, hey, how can I project this guy to be good or bad? Kind of a sad day in the NFL. That is a great day for fans, but forget the negative stuff. Let's dive into your San Francisco 49ers 2024 roster. I want to say what's out to Raphael 562 in the comments. Connor Raphael and Rob Smith, what's up? Again, let's dive into your San Francisco 49ers. The quarterback room, I've said this from the beginning of time. It is the very much most straightforward positional group on the entire roster. Brock Purdy is your quarterback number 1, with Joshua Dobbs and Brandon Allen being your 2 and or your number 3. Kyle Shanahan has not decided who this team's backup quarterback will be. I will continue to say until I'm wrong. I think it'll change week by week, opponent by opponent. They kept 3 quarterbacks, which was expected. I'm not sure why many thought Brandon Allen wouldn't be here, but he is. And the team waived quarterback Tanner Mordecai. I think this was a very straightforward move. They like Mordecai. They want to bring him back on the practice squad, but simply just not good enough to keep on the 53-man roster this year. I think the hope is next year he is your quarterback number 3, with Brock Purdy getting paid a massive sum of money, Joshua Dobbs being the quarterback 2, and Tanner Mordecai being the quarterback 3. But as I hit my table and shake my camera, this was a very straightforward room. Nothing spectacular. No surprises here. Very, very straightforward. I like the upside of Joshua Dobbs and like the very even keelness of Brandon Allen behind him. That's it for the quarterbacks, though. Moving on to running backs. This was a more of a surprise for me, at least. Kyle Juszczyk and Chris McCaffrey just cemented in stone. Those are your starting running back and fullback tandem. That is clear as day. But behind Christian McCaffrey is where we got many of our questions answered, and also kind of a surprise, mainly in the form of Elijah Mitchell, who was placed on injured reserve, and not just any injured reserve. Elijah Mitchell is done for the season. I'm not exactly sure why they didn't try to release him via an injury settlement. I believe this is the last year of his contract. So again, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe they want to retain his rights and keep him on the roster just in case. Again, I don't understand that move, but I digress. I'm not making decisions at the top, although Aiyuk hasn't re-signed yet, so maybe I should be. That said, Christian McCaffrey, Kyle Juszczyk are your 1 and 1 for running back and fullback. But with Elijah Mitchell going on injured reserve, we finally allowed Jordan Mason to get the opportunity to be the bona fide running back number 2. That was a a big contention with fans and Kyle Shanahan. Why will you not let Jordan Mason be this team's RB number 2 behind Christian McCaffrey? And Shanahan has been questioned on that in the past and seemed very stubborn, if you will, to be like, well, Elijah's the best running back behind Christian, when that really isn't entirely true, and injuries have been a major factor in Mitchell and his decline on the depth chart, especially this year. But I think it's a great opportunity for Jordan Mason. He's a young player going into, I think, year number 3 now. He deserves this opportunity. He's worked for the opportunity. And you can see just in the preseason that all the work he's put in, it's being put on the field, being put on display. The hands are better. The blocking's better. And because he's getting that opportunity, now you have rookie running back Isaac Guerendo as your RB number 3 on the depth chart. At least that's going to be assumed, him being a 4th-round pick this year. I think it really is exciting for a young player like Guerendo, who I thought, thinking Elijah Mitchell would not be on IR, that he was going to be the 4th running back on this team, going to be buried towards the end of the depth chart, but would get opportunities on kick returns. Well, now that changes. If Christian McCaffrey goes down or Jordan Mason goes down for whatever reason, Isaac Guerendo is probably the most exciting running back, at least in play style, quick, short yardage movement, the speed he obviously has, 4.3 speed. He is one of the most exciting running backs on the roster and one of the more exciting offensive players that has Jacob Cowling, Ricky Pearsall already on its roster. So I think it's a good opportunity for Mason. As Laurie Matthews says here, I picked up Mason as my fantasy running back on my bench. I think it's a good move. I'm not going to put this out there, but there are some people, some pundits, some, Twitter doctors, if you will, that believe Christian McCaffrey may not be the healthiest this season. I think having Jordan Mason being able to take carries in between the tackles is going to give Christian McCaffrey a second life, if you will. Keep him healthy for the long run, save his body from being broken and bruised by the time we hopefully reach the playoffs. But if one of those guys goes down, Guerendo's right behind them. I think it's really good for him. I think the more reps Guerendo plays, I think that, only better for him. I think he's a player that, because he hasn't had the reps in college, despite being a 5-year player, I think any reps he can get, whether it is, special teams, third string running back, whatever it may be, it's going to help him so much. That said, behind Guerendo, McCaffrey, and Jordan Mason is Patrick Taylor Jr. Cody Schrader got waived. Keyshawn Vaughn and Matt Breida got released. I wasn't shocked about the Cody Schrader release or waive, if you will, although I do think somebody else might pick him up. I think they want to bring him back. I also wouldn't be shocked if Matt Breida is brought back via the practice squad as a veteran option. I think losing Elijah Mitchell, well, it isn't the biggest loss in the world. Usually he misses 10 games anyways during the year, but I think having a veteran on your practice squad makes a lot of sense for this roster. But I also believe one of the reasons why Patrick Taylor Jr. made the roster, let's say, over Cody Schrader, over Matt Breida, was because of his special teams versatility. I go back to a handful of years ago when fans were clamoring for Jordan Mason to play. Why isn't Mason playing? One of the biggest reasons why Jordan Mason wasn't playing was because he was so darn good on special teams and had some areas to grow as a running back. Well, now that Mitchell's gone, Mason becomes your RB2. You have to fill that void. Patrick Taylor Jr. is a more proven special teams player, being in Green Bay the past year or so, now being brought in. It makes sense for him. I think he'll be the RB4 on this team, although did show a little bit of energy in that preseason finale against the Las Vegas Raiders, but I think a very straightforward running back room, although I did expect Elijah Mitchell to not be hurt, but maybe that's my own fault believing. Might have a healthy Elijah Mitchell for a season, but his season is over. And again, Matt Breida and Cody Schrader released and waived, which brings us to one of the more, I won't even say confusing, just I was shocked the San Francisco 49ers decided to retain 7 wide receivers. Usually they keep 6, they kept 7. Now, many of you will point to Ronnie Bell being that 7th player, but if you watched or listened to the last episode of the podcast, you will know that I pointed out that Ronnie Bell replaced Brandon Aiyuk in week 2 against the Rams when he got hurt last year and started for him against the Giants in week 3. I do think there is and has been an avenue that if Brandon Aiyuk is not going to be here in some form or fashion, whether it be via trade, inactive, hasn't signed, or injured, whatever that might be, Ronnie Bell would have a good opportunity to supplant him or start in his spot, unless they want to go with Pearsall or Conley. But even then, Ricky Pearsall just got back from injury and is still wearing the blue jersey of a non-contact player. So I think Ronnie Bell is more here for insurance in case Pearsall and Aiyuk cannot go. But other than that, a very straightforward receiver room. Deebo Samuel at the top, Brandon Aiyuk number 2, Juwan Jennings number 3, Pearsall 4, probably Chris Conley number 5, Jacob Cowling number 6, and again, Ronnie Bell number 7. They waived players like Tay Martin. They waived a player like Danny Gray, which I thought really wasn't a surprise. I thought Danny Gray, who didn't even play in the last preseason game, only has 1 career catch on his Pro Football Reference page. So end of an era, if you will. Just wasn't able to find his footing figuratively and literally. But he also just really couldn't figure it out, whether it was the offense, catching the football consistently, utilizing his speed. So I thought there was an opportunity for Gray to stay on the roster via injured reserve, season ending. But it felt like San Francisco was like, nope, rip the Band-Aid off. We're done. It's over. You're a bust, which it stinks. It really does stink. But kudos to players like Ronnie Bell, who was a late round pick, maybe 7th round pick last year, fighting and staying on the roster, beating Danny Gray out. Great stuff for Ronnie Bell. I think Ronnie Bell, and many of you in the comments are talking about Ronnie Bell's hands. Lori Matthews being one of them, saying Bell's ball handling gives me nightmares. Kyle Chipto says, I don't trust Bell to catch a cold. I get that. I really understand that. But ultimately, he's a punt returner. He can do kick returns. And again, he likes to block. Even if he doesn't have to catch the ball, he will get an opportunity to block and he'll take it. Kyle Shanahan at least wants that. That wasn't Danny Gray. That wasn't Tay Martin. That wasn't Trent Taylor. That wasn't John Trey Kirkland or Robbie Chosen Anderson, who were also released today. Ronnie Bell does at least something Kyle Shanahan likes, that is blocking, but also gives you some special teams maneuverability. And I think, when it's all said and done, once they get Brandon Aiyuk re-signed, hopefully, the next couple of days, they'll put Feliciano on IR, Ambry Thomas on IR. They'll bring a couple players back or sign somebody else. But I wouldn't expect Ronnie Bell to be on the roster all year long, unless they're just truly scared he won't pass through waivers, which could be a possibility, and they don't want to lose him. They see upside in him. I don't agree with that, but maybe that's a smidge of a chance of being true, although I would not lean heavily that way. So the receiver room, straightforward. The only surprise is Ronnie Bell's here. And hopefully soon they can get Brandon Aiyuk's situation figured out. Really got to get him figured out. And hopefully Ricky Pearsall can get healthy, because if Aiyuk's not going to play, you need Pearsall. You really need Pearsall. But moving along to, I think, the biggest shock, the biggest surprise of the 53-man roster announcement, that is San Francisco only has 2 tight ends on the active roster. There was a shock earlier in the day when they decided to waive Cameron Latu, which, not a big surprise. Didn't have a great preseason, although he did make my final roster prediction. This overall wasn't shocked. That was kind of hey, they usually keep 4 tight ends. He's been okay, but not sold on this. The bigger surprise was when they waived tight end Brayden Willis. So last year's draft class, both the tight ends they took to hopefully be George Kittle's backup, gone. 3rd round pick Cam Latu and 7th round pick Brayden Willis. I'm sure one of those guys will come back on the practice squad. I would hope to keep Willis, but I could see somebody else, another team, liking his versatility as a blocker on special teams, which could lead us down the road of, hey, Cam Latu's back. I don't want to go down that road, but maybe, just maybe it's a possibility. But they have 2 tight ends on the roster, George Kittle being like duh. Who else would it be? Then Jake Tunges. Wasn't Eric Saubert, wasn't Logan Thomas, who they signed, cut, then re-signed, didn't practice much, didn't play in any preseason games. He was also cut. So really, anybody you talk to, whether it was myself, other content creators, other podcasters, even journalists like David Lombardi and Matt Burrows, Matt Mayoko, Jennifer Lee Chan, they would have all told you Eric Saubert would be this team's number 2 tight end. I would like to believe that's still the plan. And that's one thing people overreact to of I can't believe they cut XYZ player. Okay, well, a lot of times they have backdoor agreements. Hey, we're going to cut you here in the next few days. We're going to place, Ambry Thomas on IR. Then we're going to bring you back. Some of that is simply just, semantics. Some of it's just, we have to do it this way to make it all work. And some of those guys will say, hey, stay in the hotel. We'll get you taken care of. Don't worry about it. I would not be shocked if that was the plan for players like Eric Saubert. I like Jake Tunges. I had him being a practice squad player, thinking they were going to keep Latu and Willis. But ultimately, Jake Tunges had arguably the 3rd best training camp of the tight ends behind Kittle and Saubert. And even then, Kittle doesn't practice much. So the 2nd best training camp / preseason of tight ends. Undrafted free agent. I think he has some upside. A 2nd-year player, I believe, maybe a 3rd-year player if I'm wrong. But there's some upside there, obviously. He did enough. He was of a group that many of them were trying to figure out, which one of us will do the least things wrong. Tunges did most of everything right. That's what gets you a job in the NFL. Good on special teams, a good enough blocker, solid hands. I think he will be the ultimate tight end number 3. I don't see him playing much this year, but at the moment, they don't really have any answers at tight end. Again, Logan Thomas is released or was released this morning or in the afternoon, and Eric Saubert gone. I would like to think they bring one of them back. I have a hard time buying into the idea. They're not keeping 2 tight ends on the roster all year. You have to at least have 3, and they usually keep 4. But I would like to think Eric Saubert or Logan Thomas, if not both, are back in the next few days. But going back to who they waived today, Mason Pline's gone. That makes sense. He was a UDFA basketball convert to football. Bigger body guy, didn't show much. His only highlight was the incomplete pass that was over his head against the Raiders in the back of the end zone. And then again, Cam Latu and Brayden Willis. Really, really stinks to see San Francisco cut 2 third-round picks today, Danny Gray and Cam Latu. I don't know what it is with the 3rd round. It does feel like that's changing. Fred Warner was there early in the 2018 season. Then it's Jair Brown, and then you have players like Jake Moody who are still on the team, and Brown's supposed to be a really good safety that hopefully ascends and takes the next step this year. But 3rd rounds are just the Niners' hell. I mean, if you were to look up in the dictionary or go to the bookstore and look for San Francisco 49ers version of Dante's Inferno and these 7 layers of hell, it's freaking the 3rd round. It's just terrible. Trey Sermon, Ty Davis Price, Cam Latu, Danny Gray. It's a nightmare of a round to pick in, to a point of where it's don't ever pick there again. And it also goes, back to, yes, injuries hurt Cam Latu last year. Injuries also hurt Danny Gray, but college football doesn't mean anything if you can't translate to the NFL. I am someone that hated the Cam Latu pick off the bat. You can go back and look at my my reaction to the 2023 draft class podcast we did, and I was not pleased, wasn't happy, hated the pick. I am someone that has been pretty adamant of what a waste of a draft pick, and I hate to be right on a third round pick. You don't mind being right on a seventh rounder. You don't mind being right about a veteran guy who's been here too long and has stayed past his welcome. Those things I'm cool with being right about. I don't like being right about third round picks that you hope to back up your all pro tight end. And Cam Latu, there was just times you asked yourself when you watched him in training camp or the preseason of like, have you played football before? Like, do you know where you're at? Like, this is the YMCA, my guy. You got to figure this thing out. Like, you continue to make just dumb mistakes, and ultimately it cost him a job. The Brayden Willis one, I was a little more shocked about. Brayden Willis played in the Super Bowl last year, which means nothing in the grand scheme of things, but you would have thought that would have meant something to somebody. I thought he was okay. I thought he was good enough to have a job. I think he's good enough to keep around. I think had Brayden Willis been a third round pick, he'd still be here. I think he's done enough to stick around, practice squad player, fifth tight end on the depth chart, whatever it may be. I think he is good enough to play in the NFL. I just think he's a player that's not going to really click until year 5 or 6. Then he'll kind of be this, third tight end journeyman that plays for a decade. And you're like, how did that guy play for that long? Oh my goodness. Okay, cool. Sometimes things work out that way, but a very weird day, for the tight ends. Kittle makes sense. Tungus makes some sense. I think I would agree with that. But Latu and Brayden Willis, one of those was a shock. One of those was not. And Logan Thomas, they are playing with that man's emotions. You want me? You want me not? You want me? You want me not? What happens there? I think they bring Eric Saubert back, but we'll see with Logan Thomas. Kind of injured, kind of not. They like him enough to, like, why would you bring him back only to release him again? Just say, hey, we'll sign you after cutdown day. Like, I don't understand that. But again, not in the room. I ain't making decisions, nor am I Jed York or John Lynch, but I digress. Moving on to the offensive line. Again, a little less shocking than tight end was, which is pretty shocking in itself. But a lot of questions with the offensive line. Players like Dominic Pooney, Jalen Moore, Spencer Burford, Colton McKivitz, Aaron Banks, Jake Brendel, Nick Zakelj, all of them make sense. Keep in mind, Trent Williams, because he did not report to training camp or play in any preseason games, does not count against the 53-man roster. So they kind of have an exemption with his name on it. Once he comes back, he's good to go. But until then, they have a roster spot to kind of maneuver with, which again is also kind of weird why they didn't keep a third tight end or didn't keep a player like Jarrett Kingston, because a lot of these names make sense to cut. A lot of these names, like, yeah, that's fine. Once John Feliciano goes on IR, you have an extra spot. I get why they didn't put John Feliciano or Amber Thomas on IR today. If you do it today, you have to designate them to either return or be season ending. If they wait a couple days, I think after the deadline passes, you can kind of wait and see how their rehab process and how that's going, and then make a decision then. So it makes sense to wait on those players. I think Feliciano will be eventually placed on IR, then brought back. But I don't know how you feel, but I did not love waiving Jarrett Kingston. I thought Jarrett Kingston was phenomenal this preseason. Now, what is preseason worth? Not much. Kyle Shanahan famously values joint practices. San Francisco had none of them this year. In fact, they canceled them this year. So not really much to see there. But in the grand scheme of things, if all you have to work with is practice and the preseason, I mean, Jarrett Kingston, yes, is a rookie. Yes, he's a late round pick rookie. I think 6th round. There's a lot of room to grow. But from the start, he was really good in pass protection, which You go back and watch the USC team last year, was not their forte. They had Caleb Williams playing hero ball every single snap, which led many to think Caleb Williams was more of a Josh Allen than a Patrick Mahomes. Now, those are big statements to make, but man, like I was completely bummed by Jarrett Kingston being cut. I thought he'd done enough to stay on the roster. If it was me, I'd much rather have Kingston over Nick Zakelj, but I get it. You don't have a backup center. You got to keep somebody. My fear is that Jarrett Kingston, the way he played during the preseason, he might get picked up by somebody else. Now, you never want to overreact like last year. Everybody was like, Keith Ishmael got picked up by the Cardinals or XYZ player. Deshaun Jameson got picked up by the Panthers. Who cares? But in this case, Jarrett Kingston was a draftable prospect, fits Kyle Shanahan's mold, being a good 3-cone, good shuttle time, which is why I was like, wait a minute, you like this guy enough to draft him. He performed really well. Why wouldn't you keep him? Maybe they know something we don't know. That happens all the time. But didn't love that. I thought there's a real opportunity for him in the next few years to be not a starter, but a valuable depth piece. And he plays guard, he plays tackle, gives you some maneuverability. And another reason as to why I was like, well, wait a minute now, that doesn't make sense is because when you look at the roster they kept, they had Aaron Banks, guard, Brendel's a center, Burford is a guard, McKivitz is a right tackle. Feliciano is injured, going to go on IR eventually. Dominic Pooney's a guard. Nick Zakelj a guard and center. So this team doesn't have a backup right tackle because, okay, if you're going to cut Kingston, don't love that, but okay. The expectation was you're going to keep somebody, let's say, like Chris Hubbard, like a Brandon Parker, like a Ben Barch, mainly a Hubbard or Parker, and they cut both those guys too. So I don't really know why that was the case. Again, I hope Kingston comes back, but my expectation is Feliciano goes on IR. They hopefully bring back, Kingston, and then eventually they maybe release or cut Nick Zakelj once Feliciano comes back. But again, they have to make room for Trent Williams. So there is some moves they're going to have to make. I think many of those moves come at linebacker, which we'll talk about in a minute. But weird offensive line stuff going on. We had a comment here in the chat on YouTube. See if I can find it for a second. Calachipto says he was disappointed in Kingston getting cut, thinks he might get claimed. Hope he doesn't get claimed. And he says the same for Drake Nugent, the center UDFA out of Michigan. Rob Smith asks here, Nugent as well. Yes, they also cut Drake Nugent, which I'm not surprised they cut him being a UDFA, but again, had a pretty good preseason, which again, doesn't mean much, but still means something. I think he'll be a practice squad player. Don't forget, this team kept Jason Poe and Keith Ishmael and Nick Zakelj on the practice squad for a long time. So they're still looking for that center of the future because Jake Brendel is an older player. He's a vet. He ain't it. Kyle Shanahan never wants to draft the center. I think the hope is whether it's Drake Nugent or Nick Zakelj, with their time on the practice squad and as now depth pieces, they'll grow into that role and have hopefully 2, 3, 4 years of the offensive system under their belt. Shanahan's not going to play a rookie at center. Never going to do it unless they stand out, which no one they picked up has thus far, but Drake Nugent, I think, is a prime candidate for the practice squad. Fingers crossed he doesn't get picked up. Calachipto also asks here, do they use both return IR distinctions? No, just one. It was on Kalia Davis. We've talked about it plenty that this defensive line, their depth is not very strong this year compared to previous seasons. They believe in Kalia Davis. They want him back towards the half of the middle of the season with the expectation of somebody else is probably going to go down or it's fresh legs on the interior, which means a ton down the stretch. of the season. Other offensive linemen they cut was Lewis Kidd and Isaac. I think it's not Alarcon. I think it's Alarcon. I think that's the case. I hope I'm right there. Don't want to be wrong, so I apologize if I am. But and then Sebastian Gutierrez. So not a lot of surprises on the offensive line, but definitely Kingston and Nugent being kind of like, okay, what's the plan here? Especially when you have to make room for Trent Williams still. So this roster, although it is the 53-man roster, is not set in stone, despite today being the deadline for that to happen, which brings us to the opposite side of the trenches, the defensive line. Obviously, you have names like Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Leonard Floyd, Malik Collins. Those guys are your starters. They were going to make the team. They're getting paid to make the team. They're getting paid to wreak havoc on opposing quarterbacks and opposing offenses. Then the depth on the defensive line, Jordan Elliott, Yetur Gross-Matos being 2 free agent signings this past year. They were going to make the team no matter what. Then some younger players like Robert Beal Jr. and I think it's Sam Okwanu. Surprised he made the team. Then, of course, Kevin Gibbons rounding things out. They did indeed keep 9 defensive linemen, which was about what I said they would do. But ultimately, it's not who I thought they were going to keep. I figured that they were going to go the veteran route, whether it was Alex Barrett or Jonathan Garvin. I think players that showed more upside than Sam Okwanu. But again, Chris Kosaric, if he likes a player, he wants to hold on to them. And let's be honest here, Sam Okwanu is not going to be a key rotational piece. He is what? He's the 5th edge rusher. I can see them trying to find somebody else to bring in and hopefully supplant him. But again, if Chris Kosaric likes your upside and doesn't want to lose you, I can see that being the case here. The odds a player like Garvin or Shaquille Brown or Alex Barrett or even Evan Anderson gets picked up are pretty low. So wasn't really shocked as to why San Francisco made the defensive line moves they did. But yeah, so very straightforward with the defensive line, which brings us to another surprising group, which I don't really know what to say. I don't know why San Francisco is carrying 6 linebackers. That was a shock to me. Usually it's a couple young guys with the veteran backup, then the starters. I understand that Dre Greenlaw is still on the PUP list, so he's not going to play through at least the first 4 weeks of the NFL season. So you can kind of cross him off for at least a month. He may come back later. Fingers crossed he comes back the exact same player he was pre-injury, which isn't likely, but if the Lord has his way, let's hope that's the case. But I was shocked that Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles made the roster. Fred Warner, not a shock. Devondre Campbell, not a shock. Players like Curtis Robinson, who had a really good training camp and a really good preseason, not a shock. D. Winters was phenomenal during the preseason. I think with D. Winters' health being up in the air, it's not super serious. It's not going to cause him to miss months and months and months, but I could see them in week 1 playing things safe if Winters isn't 100% going with Fred, Warner, Devondre Campbell, and Curtis Robinson as your starting 3 linebackers. They're vets. Warner's an all-pro. Campbell, I think a former Pro Bowler, or at least close to being a Pro Bowler with the Packers a couple years back. And then Curtis Robinson knows the system, been here for a couple years now, and definitely can fill a void that is left by a Dre Greenlaw and others. Meanwhile, again, D. Winters makes sense. Shocked by DFF making the roster. Don't love that he was there, but I think that might be a move that, while yes, they gave him guaranteed money, if let's say Trent Williams says, I want to play football again, and San Francisco says, we'll pay you the adequate money to play football again. Well, I think DFF is good as gone. That to me is like, you don't need 6 linebackers if you don't, or if you do, Jalen Graham should pass through waivers. You have him on the practice squad to go from there. And I saw a lot of people that were shocked that Tatum Bethune, rookie, 7th round pick, Florida State made the roster this year. I don't know why anybody was shocked about that. I thought he was really good during the preseason. If you knew Tatum Bethune in college or watched any of my draft uh, season coverage, or even go back and watch my scouting report on Tatum Bethune, you can see that, or in that case, listen, that Bethune to me was not a seventh round pick. Bethune to me was a player that had Mike linebacker experience, wasn't great in pass coverage, but flies around, is always around the football, and led this team in tackles during the preseason. Yes, again, there are struggles in pass coverage, but he's not going to play throughout the entirety of the year. That's a guy you want to have on your special teams unit, which again to me makes Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles a little bit redundant because let's say your starting three are Fred and Devondre and Curtis Robinson and or D Winters. Okay, then your backups are Curtis Robinson, Tatum Bethune, and you're kind of good there. Like the odds you need 6 linebackers really isn't that, you don't need it. You want to have the extra hand like Jalen Graham, I think, who will make it past waivers. But weird. But ultimately, I think they're going to walk into the year with 5 linebackers, not 6. And I really think DFF will be the odd man out in that room. Of the linebackers that were on the roster that got cut, it really was only Jalen Graham that was like, oh, of note. But even then, like Jalen Graham has not been good. He's goal line thumping linebacker, but really bad, like really bad in pass coverage. So it makes sense to not keep him around, or at least try to stash him for another season on the practice squad. He's young. There's definitely some signs of growth. It's just young, doesn't have the reps, and you hope being on the practice squad, if he can pass through waivers, can get him those valuable reps, just not hurting you in the meantime, having meaningful playing time. Let's see what else we have. Cornerbacks. This was also another one where if you point to Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles and what they did there, or keeping Ronnie Bell, albeit you can justify Ronnie Bell over Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles. But those 2 players are on the roster for other players they cut that, at least in my opinion, should have made the roster. And yes, once they put Ambry Thomas and John Feliciano on IR, they can, be brought back. But weird. I mean, Charvarius Ward, he's a lock. Isaac Gatum is a lock. Darrell Luter Jr. is a lock. Renardo Green, second round pick, he was a lock. And then they put Diamador Lenore all by himself at defensive back, which don't know why they did that. I'm assuming it's more of like a nod of you're the nickel back this year. But that is a very conscious decision by the Niners PR staff and the coaching staff in itself. So they're carrying 6 cornerbacks, Mooney Ward, Ambry Thomas, who will go on IR in the next couple of days or so, Isaac Gatum, Darrell Luter Jr., Renardo Green, and Diamador Lenore. Once Ambry Thomas goes on IR, I think there is one player that deserves to get brought back. Deserves to get brought back. That is Rock Yassin. I think, I talked about being right about Cam Latu. Throughout the preseason, I was wrong about Rock Yassin. I think when you hear a veteran piece, journeyman, hasn't stuck anywhere, has really struggled throughout his NFL career, despite being a second-round pick, my mind, sometimes just turns off. Like, no, that guy's over with. He's done. But as you watch and learn and grow, I'm sure many of you out there being older than I am, I'm 27 years old going on 28, you've watched former 4th-round picks be terrible, then be great. 1st-round picks be bust, then be good elsewhere. Rock Yassin, although I don't think is going to be great anywhere, had a really good preseason with the San Francisco 49ers. I think is good enough to be brought back over players like Chase Lucas, who I think is a practice squad candidate, and even Samuel Womack, who was waived today. Like, Rock Yassin outplayed Samuel Womack. Rock Yassin outplayed Darrell Luter Jr., albeit Luter is younger and has more potential and promise. I think Rock Yassin, we've talked about the last couple shows, he has the potential to if he is indeed brought back, round out the best cornerback, defensive back room under Kyle Shanahan and Nick Sorensen ever. Like, this team has been looking and looking and looking for depth at the cornerback position. Jason Verrett, Ambry Thomas, Dante Johnson for about a decade and a half felt like they haven't had it. This year, if they bring back Rock Ya-Sin, they can have it. And if you want to go back to 2021 when they were playing Dre Kirkpatrick and they were playing, they were playing Josh Norman, and you're like, okay, don't love these guys as my 2 or my 1 or my 3, but if they're my 5 or 6, I'm totally cool with that. And Josh Norman obviously played better than others in that group, but I think if Rock Ya-Sin's your 5 or your 6, you're feeling pretty good, double thumbs up, like we got a group here that is dogs. Mooney Ward's obviously a near all-pro player. I think Lenore is going to ascend and be phenomenal this year. I'm happy people are finally buying into his hype. You can go back and watch training camp coverage last year, training camp coverage this year for myself. We've been all over the Lenore hype train the entire time. He has looked phenomenal. I think he's going to make San Francisco re-sign him over Mooney Ward eventually. If you want a next off-season prediction, there's a reason Renardo Green is here, albeit everyone loves Mooney Ward. But this room has dogs. You have young players, veteran players, players in their prime growing and still getting better and ascending up the NFL ladder and leaderboard of cornerbacks. So this is a strong room. And I think once they can put Ambry Thomas on IR, you bring back Rock Ya-Sin, Chase Lucas goes to the practice squad, strengthens your special teams unit, strengthens your ability to play on the outside. San Francisco has the middle of the field locked up. Fred Warner, hopefully once Dre Greenlaw comes back, Talanoa Hufanga, Jair Brown. Like, most teams cannot pass the ball over the middle over San Francisco. And there has been a black hole, or an inconsistent black hole, on the right side of the cornerback room, if you will, in Ambry Thomas. If they can get rid of that black hole and be able to play the outside stronger and stronger and stronger with the player like Yadam, Renardo Green, and if one of those guys goes down, you have Rock Ya-Sin, Darrell Luter Jr., then you're in a really good spot to limit vertical offenses. That's what San Francisco needs to do. Despite San Francisco having these dogs, despite San Francisco having, it's funny, I was watching They Live with Rowdy Roddy Piper, the John Carpenter flick, where he has his sunglasses and there's aliens around him he didn't know before. When he walks in with the shotgun and is like, I'm here to do 2 things, chew gum and kick some ass. That's what San Francisco's defense wants to do. Unfortunately, there's been one player that is like, I think I want to kick some ass. I think I want to chew some gum. That's been Ambry Thomas. I like Ambry. He's cool. He's a great guy. Just not cutting it for me. But you now have players like Rock Ya-Sin, Darrell Luter Jr., and Renardo Green, Isaac Gadam, that they want to walk in. They're going to cock that shotgun saying, I'm here to chew some freaking gum and here to kick some freaking ass. Like, that's what they want to do. They want to be dogs, limit, Marvin Harrison Jr., DK Metcalf, Lockett, JSN. They want to lock down Puka and Cooper Kupp. They want to limit all those people in these vertical offenses. And you're hoping, fingers crossed, that if you play in the Super Bowl, let's just say it's against the Chiefs, because why not? You don't have to worry about, is Logan Ryan going to play nickelback for me and Lenore has to play the outside? And I'd say future conversation for a game that may never happen, but you play Kansas City this year in the middle of the season. They're going to want to get vertical on you. They're going to want to attack you. Well, if you take away one of the avenues in which they can attack you at, which we'll see what that is come middle of the year, right? This is all projection. But if you can take away Ambry Thomas and you can have a more consistent option on the outside, Lenore goes back and plays nickelback, you have a really good secondary. It's like, yes, this is phenomenal. It's great. And you limit what Mahomes can do, which is already hard in itself and nearly impossible, but you at least give yourself a stronger fighting chance. And like we all know, all we needed was one more point. One more point, and it would have been all ours. Rob Smith asks me here, going back to my They Live comment, Did you watch it on VHS? I have an older family, Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, Midwestern. My mom's in her 70s, love her to death. Grew up very much in the VHS, where the cupboard's full of, the old Star Wars VHSs, the old Indiana Jones VHSs, all those things. My sister's a fanatic. She loves, physical media. My brother's the same way. So watch it on VHS, watch it on, when AMC used to play all the old movies, it was on MeTV, on all those old channels my father used to watch, and, The Rifleman, what else is out there? Oh my God, there's so many other shows. MASH, obviously, is a big one, but my dad, obviously, watching House from the 80s, the horror movie. So yes, very much a VHS family, despite being 27 years old and growing up in this streaming and DVD generation. But moving on to the safety room, because nobody actually cares about special teams. So Jake Moody, oh, Jake, you're great. Mitch Wisnowski, oh, you punt, cool, yay. Taylor Pepper, good job long snapping. Moving along here to the safety room of Jair Brown, George Odom, Malik Mustafa, and arguably the biggest surprise of this whole darn thing is Talanoa Hufanga's back, baby. The Tongan Tiger has returned, albeit not to the field just yet, but the fact that they activated him, said on the PUP list no longer, means he's going to be out there week number 1 in some form, some fashion. My assumption is that Jair Brown, George Odom start. Hufanga's then mixed in here or there, or as a special teams player to get his bearings, get his legs back up from under him. That way, come week 3, week 4, week 5, week 6, once the NFL season really gets going and you're in it's not dog days of summer, the cat days of winter, whatever it might be. When you're in the cat days of winter, meowing it up, and you need Talanoa Hufanga, the Tongan Tiger, see how that works, right? You need him out there making plays, being one of those defensive backs that, hey, I want to kick some ass and chew some gum. That's what your safety room is. So good to see from him. Really awesome to see him return. I was kind of shocked that Tracy Walker wasn't retained, but knowing Hufanga is back, that does make sense. And other than that, there really was no other shocks. We did get some news on Dre Greenlaw that he's going to stay on the PUP list and, again, can be activated later on in the year around week 5 or 6. My expectation is he probably is brought back during the bye week. That's a really safe chance for him to practice for a week or so, get his body back to being healthy. They're not going to rush him back. There's no reason to, but a really, really, really solid team. I think that in regards to who they could bring back, Rock Yassin makes sense. Jarrett Kingston makes sense. Logan Thomas and Eric Saubert makes sense. They're going to have to make room for Trent Williams. And hopefully Brandon Aiyuk is signed soon. The move of Ronnie Bell makes me believe they are concerned he's not going to be signed soon. It also makes me believe they're not going to trade him. I've never thought, well, I won't say never, because there was a time where it was like, oh, what's going on here? But I don't believe they're going to trade Brandon Aiyuk. And that's why the Ronnie Bell keeping was like, like they're concerned that he's not going to be out there week number 1 against the Jets. Don't love that, but hopefully, fingers crossed, they can get that stuff figured out. Really need him out there. Really need him out there, whether it's a new deal, 5th-year option. You want to win, you got to have Trent Williams primarily and Brandon Aiyuk back on that field. But other than that, not too many shocking things. There are some players out there. I thought, I don't know exactly who the Commanders cut today, so forgive me for not watching the Washington Commanders cut list. I do think there are some players out there that the Commanders cut. They're in a really interesting spot as an organization that it's a new regime, new GM, new ownership, new head coach, new offensive coordinator. It's a whole new, thing going out there in Washington. They are trying to clear out all of the previous regime's draft picks. Many of those, KJ Henry was one. There was a center who got cut today. I'm forgetting his name. Then Jamin Davis was kind of on that roster bubble. Not sure exactly what happened to him, but on a team that I still believe needs edge rushing depth, with Leonard Floyd being day to day and Gross Matos being week to week, you want to have, all your guys ready to go. And if you can get another team's former first round pick, that certainly helps. I think, the Jets, like Rob Smith says here, they have plenty of edge rushers. I think they kept 3 undrafted defensive linemen, which is crazy, but good for them. But that means there are more proven pieces, or maybe some players that you didn't expect to get cut now on the open market. I think San Francisco is probably playing a little bit safe with the Feliciano and Ambry Thomas injured reserve placing, if you will, simply because, yes, they want to wait, figure out how the rehab is going in the future, but also, now that the market's open, you can scour out there and kind of, trudge through free agency and see who's, going to be open, who can you maybe re-sign. KJ Henry's one, Jamin Davis is one via trade with the Commanders. And then, I think, Jalen Holmes from the Jets, again, I'm not sure if they kept him or cut him, so I apologize. But if he is cut, if he is released, I think maybe a player Chris Kosierek would like. Not the most, not the fastest guy. He's more of a Leonard Floyd, high motor, high effort compared to, athletic freak like others would maybe want instead. But sometimes a depth piece, you need high motor players. Not going to give up on plays. Those are guys that make plays for you when other players go down. So definitely some options out there. I think tight end, there was like 95 tight ends cut today. Was really surprised. A lot of veteran tight ends out there. So definitely, like, I could name 30 of them and say, this guy makes sense. That guy makes sense. But I think San Francisco, if they're healthy enough, Saubert and Logan Thomas are good. Maybe you look at a couple more guys, but no one really comes to mind of like, I got to have that guy. It's more of like, how can you round out the roster compared to how can you find a starter? Like, there's no left tackles out there, as Lori Matthews asks. There's no right tackles out there. I think San Francisco cut Chris Hubbard, so probably one of the better right tackles depth-wise, albeit nobody really has good backup right tackles. But again, not really much out there to look at. But ultimately, what do you think of San Francisco's 2024 roster? It's not set in stone. Moves are going to be made, but when you got the announcement, when you saw that this was the Niners team essentially headed into week number 1, minus Trent Williams, who hopefully is back soon, how'd you feel? How'd you feel? It felt like that we're in a good spot. That, Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, like, I know there's been a tumultuous offseason with 2 guys you got to have back. You want back in Aiyuk and Trent, but ultimately, this roster is still stacked, head to toe. Now, is it missing an arm? Maybe. Is it missing a couple fingers? Maybe. But you can do a lot with one hand. A lot with one hand. So that sounded overly sexual, so I apologize. But anyways, really good roster, good team. I think, for Jim Everett the Great up here in this chat, talking about his Rams spanking San Francisco this year. I hate to break it to you, Jim. You got 3 offensive linemen out, and Tyler Higbee's not going to be active for that game against us. Week number, 2 or 3 of the season, whatever it might be. I don't know what it is. I think it's 3. So I wouldn't be too sure of yourself. And your starting running back is now your punt returner. So anything can happen. Anything can happen. And by that time, maybe Trent misses game 1. Maybe Aiyuk misses game 1 and 2. And they come back week 3 at Levi South. Wouldn't that be something? We have a question here by Papa J before we end the show. Sterling, do you see the Niners using Mason a lot more this season than they did with CMC's backup last season? Yes, yes, and yes. Sometimes Kyle Shanahan gives lip service. Sometimes he says things. He lies. Doesn't mean them. I do believe that Kyle Shanahan is to be trusted, wanting to preserve Christian McCaffrey. I'm not sure how much. I think Kyle Shanahan wants to run the rock. The one thing Jordan Mason cannot do is fumble the football, though. If he fumbles in the first 2 weeks, oh my God. You're going to see Isaac Rendo and Patrick Taylor Jr. maybe get reps, but more likely you're never going to see a backup running back again. But I think the plan is a bigger body running back later in games, preserve McCaffrey, get a big lead with Purdy, Aiyuk, and Deebo, and Kittle and McCaffrey, and hopefully Trent back out there, get a 10, 20-point lead, then let Mason carry the rest of the way. He's the closer, right? CMC called him Mariano Rivera, which is crazy to say, but if you want to be a closer, go out there and close games after your offense gets you a big lead. I think that is the plan. But that's all I have for you today. If you kindly would like, share, subscribe, leave that review, and tell me down below, what do you think of the San Francisco 49ers 2024 53-man roster? Who would you kept? Who should they have cut? What moves do you want them to make? You can tell me down below or on social media at 49ers_access is the X or Twitter. 49ers.access is the Instagram. And if you want to see your Niners play this year, go on SeatGeek.com, find your tickets. When you go to checkout, use the promo code 49ersaccess. 49 ERSACCESS at SeatGeek.com and save yourself $20 off your first purchase. And if you want to see everyone's takeaways, all the articles, all the podcasts, all the latest YouTube videos like this one, which Rob Smith says, good show, great info. If you want further great info, thank you, Rob, by the way, go to sportspider.com. They categorize all the latest news, articles, and podcasts by team, giving you up-to-date information all in one place. So you're not going to 17 different websites, 45 different tabs. It's one tab, one website in the exact same spot for you, dedicated to your NFL favorite team. In my case, it's the 49ers. Go to sportspider.com, find the 49ers, and get all the latest news about your favorite team. And if you would, you got a new sponsor of the show. If you love fantasy football, if you love Underdog Fantasy, don't go there. Forget Underdog. No one wants to play Underdog. My brother used to watch that cartoon. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Underdog. No, it is Locker. Go to Locker. Get the Locker app right now. Join my fantasy league called 49ers Access. Join the league and you can put little bets, if you will, or you can play for free and try to win the grand jackpot of over right now $450. But the more people we get in that fantasy football league, the higher that jackpot goes. It's all 32 teams every single game day. We're making decisions, making choices, and it's all season long. So join the league. Click that link down below in the description, and let's have some fun this NFL season. My name is Sterling Bennett, saying thank you for watching, listening, to everybody in the comments. Until next time, stay faithful.